All right, well, I'm going to have a start here. It is 11 o'clock. Thank you for everyone that was able to join us today virtually on this, what is this, the 11th of August for our August Safety Council meeting, the Marion Area Safety Council meeting. And glad to see at least some names that I recognize, even though we can't see y'all in person for another whole program year. But very happy that you're able to join us here and those that are watching the recording afterwards. So today we have a couple different speakers, and which will be Jared Cass, the Director of Occupational Medicine and Employee Health at Avita Health System, Workwell. And then we have Deb Schultz, Regional Business Consultant and the Employer Services Division of Ohio Bwc, who will both be talking to us today about the transitional workplace and the transitional work program bonus and grant. And I'll have them both get into that more, but a couple of just quick things. The Lacey Award, I believe we sent out one notice on that. We, of course, had to skip last year's award process, but that is back, and we're hoping to be able to conduct those again later on this year. If you have any interest in, again, highlighting and showcasing your dedication to safety with that very prestigious award that we've had in this community since, I believe, the 60s, that huge trophy thing. If you're interested in that, I believe we're sending out another email about it, but you can also do a search through your back emails and find Lacey Award there as well to fill out that very simple one-page application. And then there's a couple other steps to that. But again, it's a fantastic award that's been on for a very long time. And we'd love to have some even more participation in it for this year. And then the other thing, I guess, is that, yeah, Laura Smith, our BWC representative, might have some announcements. I'll hand it over to her.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm going to just share my screen for you guys really quick. There we go. Just some quick updates. One big one, we just found out last week as consultants, we are able to start coming back into the field. So if you are interested in having us come into your facility, we're going to have to figure out exactly what we're allowed to do. Obviously, the goal, if it's just a meeting, we'll probably want to continue virtual facilities. So if you're interested in IH, ergo, or safety, just reach out. Excuse me, sorry. Just reach out to us. Who knew I would be sneezing from allergies today on the hot, muggy monsoon that we have right now. But yeah, I want to let you guys know that obviously we're going to follow your employee or protocols. So if it's, vaccinated, masks, what have you, we're going to make sure that we follow what you guys require to keep everybody safe. But that is a nice update that we found that we are able to start coming back into the field. Just some of the classes that we're offering. We don't have any in-person classes, I believe, for this entire policy year, again, just due to the pandemic. But we do offer some virtual classes. We have lockout, tagout practices. Sorry, that was last week. We do have work zone traffic and control that's coming up on the 18th. Confined space is coming up the 23rd and 24th. That's going to be split into 2 days, just half-day classes, because it's a lot to sit through a virtual class. And we understand that. We also have electrical safety in the workplace through insight and implementation of NFPA 70E, and that's the end of August 30th through the 31st. I believe the email has been sent out to you guys from the chamber on these. So, but if you need the link or anything, just let me know. And we also have a webinar tomorrow from 10 to 11 on the 7 habits of highly effective safety teams. So that's going to be a pretty interesting one if you wanted to attend. I know we're all sick of OSHA, or no, we're not sick of OSHA. We're sick of COVID.
Wow.
But, we got the Delta variants going out. I know. Wow. OSHA is giving us good news. OSHA has got some standard guidance and directives out there. And then there's also a new small business handbook that's been created by them, and it's actually updated and it's actually pretty good. So if you'd be interested in that, feel free to reach out. I've got the link, or you can go to their website and find that. But we are not sick of OSHA. Let me make sure we're clear on that. We're all sick of COVID, but it's going to be here, seems like, for another round or so. But OSHA does have some information out there on revised enforcement, inspection and enforcement wise. So always check out OSHA's website for more information. And then this just came to me, I found it in my email this morning. There is an Ohio EPA grant webinar for tomorrow or Friday. It's for water and wastewater infrastructure. They'll walk you through kind of who's eligible, what kind of projects are eligible, how to fill out the grant application, get it submitted and things like that. And that's free through the Ohio EPA. So if you are looking for doing any water or wastewater infrastructure, there is a grant program webinar on Friday. I just thought I would share that with you guys as well. And this is Safe and Sound Week for NIOSH and OSHA. So if you guys are doing anything, trying to, get employee participation, get that management leadership, register and take part, just to kind of show, again, safety is important. I know we're getting school's about to start and we're getting these variants, so our focus might be shifting away from safety again, but we want to make sure that we still focus on occupational hazards there at the work site. So Safe and Sound Week is a good opportunity to get some information on that. And with that, I will pass it back to Matt.
Thank you, Laura. And some good information there. And I'm assuming that Laura, like she always does, will send us that PowerPoint immediately after this meeting. We'll send that right back out, which looks like some hyperlinks to some of those on some of those slides for registration. So with that, I believe I'm going to hand it over now to Deb. And Deb, let me know again if you'd like me to drive.
Well, let's give it a shot here and see what happens. Are we seeing my PowerPoint?
That's a good start. Yeah, looks like it's working.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see people other than my 2 dogs and my husband. Although I love all 3 of them dearly. As you can tell, we're still working virtually from home. However, I have become accustomed to it. Anyway, today I'm going to talk with everyone about BWC's Transitional Work Bonus Program and the Transitional Work Grant and how they can help your business reduce your claims costs, keep your injured workers engaged in the workforce, which can improve your bottom line. And also it shows that your organization cares about employees who, let's face it, your employees are truly your organization's most valuable asset. Transitional work is not a one-size-fits-all. There is no cookie-cutter approach. Would transitional work be the same for a bakery as, say, an auto manufacturer? Do all injured workers come back to work with restrictions? Do you put them in the office? Is that a good idea? Probably not. And that's why BWC has established the Transitional Work Bonus Program, as well as the grant, to assist you to identify tasks and activities that employees can be done by all your employees, no matter what area of your workforce. And we want your transitional work program to be a success. And that's why we've established the bonus program and the grants. And as you will hear from Jared later, there are developers available to assist you in establishing your transitional work program. And as I said, we have the grant. Okay, did my slide change?
Yes.
Yep, okay. What happened here? So let's first talk about the fact that transitional work is not light duty. Employers have struggled throughout the years with light duty work. The term itself can give someone the appearance of a specific job that is easy, simple, not challenging, or even permanent. And hey, who doesn't want that light duty job? That can cause a problem within an organization. Whereas transitional work is tailored to specific jobs within your business, yet flexible enough to take into consideration specific medical restrictions that a physician would impose on an injured worker. In other words, It is a structured return to work where the injured worker transitions gradually, utilizing real job duties for a specified period of time to get them back to the original goal of their original job with you. So why is this so important? Well, we all know claims cost drive your workers' comp premium rates. So if you can reduce the claims cost by keeping your injured workers working or get them back quicker, you can directly impact these costs. But it's also the indirect costs that are not often thought about. What if your injured worker's off for several months? Somebody's got to do their job, or you wouldn't have hired them in the first place. National statistics show that indirect costs for a lost time claim are 4 times greater than any direct claims expense. These costs include decreased productivity, hiring cost, additional expenses to train, overtime, loss of work, productivity, and even legal fees. Injured workers may recover more quickly and participate in work activities as soon as they're medically able. They may also experience a smoother transition, which can lead to improved self-esteem, which this can all have a direct impact on your labor cost, productivity. And let's face it, employees talk. Showing that you care enough about them to bring them back to work keeps them engaged in the workforce and with their co-workers. And it sends a message to all of your employees that they truly are your most valuable asset. So let's take a look at the program. The Transitional Work Bonus Program is offered to all eligible public and private state fund employers. What does eligible mean? You're a current state fund policy, you're in active status, not currently lapsed, not have cumulative lapse periods in the last 12 months, and that your true-up is completed and any premium paid by that deadline. Quick note here for private employers listening today, your true-up is due August 15th. So if you haven't completed it yet, when you get off this webinar, check and make sure that's done, because that is a factor for program eligibility. Now, public employers, if anyone's out there, your true-up is May 15th. So unless you didn't complete it last February, you should be good to go till next February. So signing up for the Transitional Work Program is pretty easy. The application is a TWB1, which can be found online. Private employers, the application deadline is the last business day of May for the upcoming July policy year. So for the current year we're in that just began last month, you would want to plan for July of 2022. Now, public employers.
Well, Deb, real quick one, just making sure I see transitional work plan and the transitional work bonus. Are they looking for a TW, did you say P or B?
It's a TWB1 is the application.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then public employers, your policy year begins January 1st. So the end of November is your application deadline. And once you enroll, as long as your eligibility remains consistent, you would automatically be enrolled going forward. So that's the easy part. Now, to be eligible for the rebate, you must have a transitional work plan that's developed and consists of a policy, community resources or preferred providers, employee education and training. Your employees have to know at least the basics of what the program entails. You will have to have completed jobs analyses and then an evaluation of the program. So by using a transitional work plan, you would be eligible for up to a 10% rebate after the plan year ends by submitting evidence of your program, And how is that 10% calculated? We're going to look at the claims that occur in the year that you sign up for. And we're going to identify eligible claims. What's an eligible claim? Well, transitional work. We want to see claims where an injured worker has been, a physician has indicated they have medical restrictions and can't return to their full job. So that is the first criteria. It has to be an allowed claim. They have to have medical restrictions saying they can come back to work. And then they have to come back to work with those restrictions. And that is documented by a formal offer, which is another form. That's the TWB2. And that identifies that you have offered work transitionally to your employee, and the injured worker has to accept it. So that, completing those steps, is a successful claim or a successful return to work with those restrictions. So then the 10%, how is it calculated? 6 months after the policy year ends, we're going to do a look back of the injuries that occurred during that year and look for those eligible claims. In other words, claims where physician released them to come back to work with restrictions. And how many of those claims were you able to bring back to work? That's what we're going to look for. So let's use the example of 10 eligible claims. I hope you don't have 10 claims where injured workers have medical restrictions, but let's use that example. For some reason, you were only successful in bringing 5 back. If the injured worker declines, I mean, I suppose that has other ramifications if an injured worker declines restricted duty. But let's say only 5. Then you would be eligible for 50% of that 10%, which would be 5%. Now let's flip it around a little bit. Let's say you had 1 claim. Because you're a small employer, you had 1 claim. The physician says they can't lift more than 20 pounds, and you're able to accommodate that. That is 1 eligible and 1 successful. You would be eligible for the full 10%. It's all based on the claims that occur in that year. So that sounds easy, right? I know it's very confusing, but Jared's going to cover a lot of details in his presentation. But I want to move on to the grant, because the grant is truly your opportunity to recoup some of the costs for developing this program. The eligibility for the grant has changed recently. It used to be a one and done. You've got a transitional work grant for the life of your business. Well, let's face it, workforces have changed through the years. We're more computerized, mechanicalized. So a welder 15 years ago may be automated today. So the transitional work the program needs to be updated, the job analysis reevaluated. So BWC saw that, and the changes are now you're eligible every 5 years. So if you have the program and you just need to have a developer take a look at it, these funds are available to you again. And it is now a 100% reimbursement, whereas it was a 3-to-1 match previously. And how are they determined? It's based on the size of your organization. So if you have anywhere from 11 to 200 plus employees, you're eligible for the transitional work grant once every 5 years to develop a transitional work program. And the funds are to be used to work with a BWC certified transitional work developer who will work with you to develop your program. So if you have anywhere from 11 to 49 employees, you're eligible up to $2,900. 50 to 199 employees, you would be eligible up to $5,200. And if you happen to have 200 or more employees, you would be eligible for the $6,300. These funds are to be used for the work of your BWC accredited transitional work developer. Was there a question or?
Oh, we did have a question, but let's see. It looks like it might be being answered by Jared in the text, but the question was, what if you have a small workforce, a plan in place, and no recordable injuries?
Well, ultimately, that is the goal. If you have no injuries, there's no bonus. But the bonus is the fact that you don't have those costs that impact your premiums. So
That's kind of what Jared responded with. No injuries, you are not eligible for the bonus. The bonus is only by illustrating that you utilize the TW program by returning the injured worker to work through the program.
and hopefully the majority of you do not experience lost time claims. That is our goal. I always tell employers, put us out of business. Don't have any injuries. Unfortunately, that's not going to occur. So that's why, in a way, this is a good opportunity. If you get enrolled and you have your plan and you're automatically enrolled and you remain eligible, it's there if you need it. But if you never need to utilize it, that's truly the best. So I want to reiterate again the benefits of transitional work. First of all, reducing claim costs up front reduces your premiums. For any of you who have had what might seem like a small claim, but in today's world, claims costs, medical costs, lost wages, they can really hit your bottom line. So keeping your injured workers working is truly the best. It reinforces your management's commitment to your employees' welfare. As I said, we hire employees to do a job. Let's keep them working. They came to work for you for a paycheck. Maintaining your quality, your production, increase safety, prevent future injuries. And for those of you who may not have involvement with this aspect of your workers' comp, there is a webinar coming up on August 24th that you can share with the staff in your organization who may benefit from getting more information on this or hearing more information, or by the recorded webinar today. So that's coming up August 24th, and I've included the page on our website where you can sign up for this. I also included my contact information in case I can be of assistance regarding any workers' comp issues you may have had. Now, in years past, many of you, I don't know how many of you have worked with the business consulting group, but Troy Bond originally covered the Marion territory. He has since retired, and now I cover the Marion area as well as the rest of his county. So I'm a resource for you regarding any workers' comp issues. And I always say, if I don't have the answers, I know where to go to get them for you. So you've got my contact information on that slide. I will stay on the webinar in case there are any questions after Jared's presentation. And then if you haven't had enough of BWC, I would encourage you to follow us on social media. With that, I'll turn it back over to Matthew to turn it over to Jared, if I can figure out how to do this. Stop sharing somehow.
Deb, thank you so much. Great presentation. And I'll of course have her slides and her contact information in an email that will go out with the recording of this after the conclusion of this presentation. So with that, thank you again, Deb. I'll hand it over to Jared. And it looks like he's already got his slides up, so should be good to go.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Deb. I appreciate that. You did a very good job. So that was a nice intro. You covered a lot of the topics that I was going to touch upon. So I made this presentation somewhat formal and somewhat my typical presentation, which is not formal. So I can bounce back and forth. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody today. She talks at a much more consistent and better pace than I do. So I always ask everybody to be ready to listen fast because I talk fast, but I do appreciate the opportunity. If you have any questions afterwards, like you said, feel free to ask, or you can reach out to either one of us outside of this. I have my contact information up here. I'm not tired of OSHA. Just want to be clear about that. So anyway, we'll get this going here. Definition of transitional work allows an employee with temporary work restrictions to work in a modified or alternative capacity for a defined period of time. The defined period of time is one of the significant differences between light duty that we've had historically and transitional work. And we'll kind of get into some of those things here. So without getting into an EEOC or ADA issue, I'm going to start out by asking how old you are, but I really am not asking. But the point is, if you remember back in the day when you would get injured, where do you go? Now, hopefully it's an occupational medicine clinic if it's work related. But back in the day, you went to the ER. So what you really meant to say now today is you go to the ED. So it's much improved. Quite honestly, it's not really different, but the name is, there's no significant real difference. So the number one business expense and who manages it. So as Deb said, not only are your employees your number one asset, typically they're also your number one expense. So it just makes sense when they tick the box for both those categories that we spend some time on them. So you meant to say human capital management if you're cool. So Doug Sharger, he's on here. I don't know what you use, maybe just your people. I don't know. But anyway, maybe you can tell me later. How do you keep a pulse of your outcomes? Used to be customer satisfaction. Then we said customer loyalty. Now we talk about the customer experience, but it really is all the same. Nice thing about transitional work, it's not the same. So it used to be we don't have light duty. Then in the 20 some years I've been doing this, people would say, hey, we have light duty. We can take people back. This is awesome. Then we went to, no, I don't have light duty. I have modified jobs because I'm on top of the game. Then we went into ergonomics. So I don't need to do any of that kind of stuff because I don't have injuries, because proactively I reduce the risk through ergonomic interventions. Then people started throwing out cool acronyms like we do essential function tests and functional capacity evaluations. And then we said, that's all well and good, but you're missing employee morale. And then why aren't you talking about turnover? Well, transitional work is a structured program, but it's just that. It's not going to solve your problems if you don't think about all the other issues. And that's why I say this is kind of an eclectic program, because transitional work is not going to get someone back to work in and of it by itself, but it's a good groundwork to take off from. I've been doing transitional work grants since about 2002 when the grant first rolled out. So I've done quite a few to employers, and we really have seen just how well it works. So back in the day, we used to choose people to be leaders by IQ, and now we have understood that we use a little more EQ, and this definitely impacts how you deal with return to work. Thought this was extremely interesting. I'm kind of geeky about this at times, but this morning I got a call from a friend of mine. He had surgery, and I had called him. He missed the call and he called me back. I said, hey, I just wondered how things were going, surgery, etc. Very first thing out of his mouth is, my boss, I've worked there so many years and I've been off work for 3 weeks. I'm supposed to return back to work on Friday. And he called me today and said, just want to make sure you're going to be back Friday. And that SOB didn't ask how I'm doing. He hasn't called me in the 3 weeks I've been off work. All he cares about is if I'm getting back to work. So I have some stories I've shared in the past of examples of how the EQ aspect of this can really impact the return to work. And I don't really like that side of it. I think if you heard me talk before, my dad's a big burly welder and you just shut up and you do what you're told. And if someone would have told me 25 years ago in therapy, you'll be talking about emotional intelligence and making sure you really, really care about what people think, I would have said, no, I won't be, but that's cute that you think that. And here we are. So this is rather than using one of my historical examples, it's pretty cool to have an example this morning of someone he made the exact comment, I don't even feel like going back to work now. Last thing I want to do is go back and work for that guy. Well, he still had the injury. He still had surgery. He has the same job. He's been there the same amount of years. He has the same boss, the same coworkers, the same job functions. But based on just how that went, he doesn't want to go back. So that's why I say transitional work is a really, really good structured program to have as groundwork but you really need to be able to hit some of these other boxes if it's going to work. So are you more accepting of information when you understand it? You've been involved in the decision-making process and it makes sense. I'm sure that you are. And that's one thing that transitional work allows. And we'll explain a little bit of that here in a minute. So IQ is just how well you scored on a test, and EQ, it gives me a headache just reading all that. It's hard to read, let alone think that you're going to practice that daily, but we need to work on that. So pretty simple, right? The only thing you have to do is make sure finance, HR, safety, the injured worker, and the supervisor understands it. Then, of course, make sure the BWC, MCO, TPA, attorney, patient, spouse, case manager, voc rehab, union, and especially since Laura loves them, the OSHA, because they're involved as well. I didn't put them in there. No slight, sorry. So the M word, I've talked about this before, but people say, why can't we get people back to work? Does anyone know what the M word is? Unmute and chime in or chat or anything? No?
Motivate.
What's that?
Motivate.
That's a good M word. This is an M word allegedly for the reason why we can't get people back to work. I'll give you some clues here. Money's a good one too. I'm not talking about Doug.
Morale.
Morale is a big one, you're right, but and that's
And I love
related to
OSHA.
this.
I don't know, Laura.
Millennials.
Millennials. Exactly. So rather than say, well, people can't get back to work because they're all scumbag, lazy, clueless people, and it's the millennials. Well, I'm not going to, this talk isn't about millennials, and I definitely feel like at times that's probably fairly accurate, but it's bigger than that. We actually have to address, even for the millennials, the scumbag, dirtball, lazy, and clueless people. So really, they're not necessarily that. They're just individuals born between these dates. And sometimes they do create issues with return to work. And sometimes people being born before 81 and after 96 do as well. So we can't use that as an excuse to just say, I'm not dealing with return to work. It's just the millennials these days. They're all on drugs, I tell you. That's what I hear a lot of people, older people say. So preventing and reporting injuries, et cetera, we have to do a lot of training for our leadership, not just how to address the return to work, but how to address these other things. So I've heard a lot of employers say, I can't even use transitional work or any of these fancy terms because they don't even tell me that the injury happened. So if you think about why they might not tell you that they had an injury, this is what injured workers say, and it's actually pretty accurate. They'll be put on a list, or they fear that they will be. Do you report every ache and pain to a doctor? I know I have quite a few aches and pains at times, and typically they go away. If I every single time went to my boss and said, hey, my elbow hurts, hey, my shoulder hurts, not to be relentless, but I'd be like, Doug, no one wants to be a whiner. So anyway, it'll go away. Peer pressure. Your buddies say, hey, we get a pizza party if we don't have any injuries. So if you do that, you're going to screw this up. Or they're just going to call you a wuss and say, I've been doing the job longer than you and I'm twice your age, millennials. Safety goals. You want to make sure you're hitting those, and you might not. Management by threat. I don't know how many of you out there like that, but when someone tells me you have to report this, right off the bat, I'm trying to figure out a way that I don't have to report it. Or I'm trying to identify what are the consequences if I don't report it, because I'll take a lashing. I just don't want to comply. Surveys are better than nothing, but not great. So if you're surveying people and how they feel about these types of things, that's fine. But actually going out and walking around and interviewing them is much better. So some people say, I kicked out a survey and they said they would report it. Well, turns out obviously they're not, and there's a reason why. Sometimes we have some mistakes when they're trying to do training. And again, this is all relative to the transitional work process. I've heard people say, we had this guy come in and it didn't really work, so we're bringing him back next year. Well, why would you bring the same guy back that the training didn't work? That's not a good idea. Or they say, we don't need to train. It's common sense. You get injured, you report it, you come back to work on restrictions, et cetera. You walk out on the shop floor and you're going to teach them and you're going to train them on how to lift. Not really good technique. So as soon as I go out and say, I'm going to teach you how to lift, I joke with different departments and say, so here I am. And thank goodness, because you've had stuff laying around for 20 years that you didn't know how to move, but now I'm going to teach you how to lift. Sometimes I hear people say, well, it's not return to work. It's not ergonomics. The equipment's the problem. It's not the best equipment. That chair only has 4 knobs. So let's go buy a chair with 8 knobs, but we never educated them on how to adjust it or what we're looking for. Teach people what they know. A lot of times that's an insult. If I say, how do you lift? They say with my legs, not my back. Okay, well then we move on. We don't need to go on and on about things that they already know. Mandatory, like I said, nothing's mandatory. Maybe like they say, death and taxes. But as soon as you say it's mandatory, people start thinking, well, that's optional with varying degrees of consequences, but don't tell me it's mandatory. If we ignore feelings, that's going to be a trigger to cause issues almost all the time. And I've been doing this a long time. I can tell you from experience, it typically doesn't go well. And then if we react versus respond. So as soon as the injured worker comes up to us and says, hey, I was injured, I'm going to go to the occupational health clinic. Don't reply with, and I've seen this a lot, shocker, day one when you came with gel in your hair, I knew you were soft and you weren't going to be able to handle the job. That's not going to head towards a successful return to work program. So the transition work grant has 3 components: the policies and procedures, the job site analyses. So we are able to identify what the essential functions of the job are, so we know what we need to get them back to, and which tasks they might be able to do in the interim as they transition back, and then the training. So Deb did a good job of hitting on those. So occupational medicine is just a branch of medicine dealing with the prevention and treatment of job-related injuries. We need a process, not a program. So if you put in a transition work program and say, there, got the grant, we're good, that's not going to work. What transition work is not, is back in the day when it was just injury care. So that was OCMED, you got treatment. Then a little bit newer than that, but still old, was we're going to do some isokinetic job testing. So we throw someone on a machine and find out what they can do. That does not work. What was trendy, and I definitely don't want to dismiss ergonomics as just being trendy. I'm certified in ergonomics. It definitely is beneficial. But all of a sudden people said, no more worries of anything. We have ergonomics. We're going to design the job better and all our worries will go away. Well, now we have transitional work. And quite honestly, it's a mix of all those things and then some. And mainly it's communication and customer service with the goal of getting that person back to work. And again, we'll talk about that some more. So the first thing you don't want to do is walk in and say safety first, because I always joke that safety is not first. What's really first is money. So if you ram it down their throat that safety's first, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to say, hey, for $6 million, I can guarantee that you'll never have another injury. And if you do, I'll pay for the cost of all the treatment, everything, for the duration of the existence of this corporation. And they're going to come back and say, how many million? We can't do that. I'm going to say, yeah, you can. Safety's first. So if I can guarantee no injuries, why wouldn't you do it? Well, because it costs a lot of money. So speaking of money, transitional work is a way to save money. So a 5-year research study showed that there was an 86% decline in medical only and lost time claims using transitional work. Average temporary total days or days away per claim declined 51%, and 50% of employers with a grant were able to achieve group rating. Some personal information here: as an occupational therapist in the state of Ohio, and then Matt Call, who is a physical therapist here at Avita in the occupational medicine program. This shows we use transitional work, and this isn't like tipping our hat that we do so well what we do. This is just that a therapist is a therapist is a therapist. However, if you incorporate these types of on-site treatment, transitional work practices, it works. So here is an actual Bwc scorecard that they rate you as a therapist in the state of Ohio relative to these criteria and more. I just took some highlights here. And then we do a definitely willing to recommend score. We've had 100% for about 2 years. That's very tough to achieve because you're dealing with people who are many times disgruntled, like my friend this morning saying, I don't want to go back, and mad at the world. So this is a significant benefit to being able to achieve these types of numbers, is using transitional work. Some employers say, I don't need to do that because we just use common sense. Well, I joked at how much sense do we all have in common, and how common is common sense. A lot of times a fresh set of eyes, outside looking in will quickly be able to identify issues or problems, or as we say, opportunities for improvement, which a transitional work developer can assist you in identifying. And a lot of times that's a dream come true for an attorney. So if you go into a hearing and your employer, as an employer, your basis is common sense. They love that. Like, so you don't have to program policies. We just use common sense. Okay. They salivate when they hear that. So light duty, modified duty, transitional work. Bottom line is, when do I go back to work? The answer with transitional work typically is now. You go back immediately with some functional restrictions that the employer can accommodate. You gradually return them back to work through communication, team approach, ergonomic intervention, functional testing if necessary, on-site therapy. Transitional work is based on on-site therapy at the employer. You can mix it up and do in-clinic and on-site, but by definition, transitional work is therapy provided on-site. Some candid discussions regarding barriers. In the old model, when the patient came to me in the clinic and we did therapy, and they would tell me they're not going back to work because their boss is a jerk, and we're all trying to figure out what we can do to get them back. And the bottom line is they're just disgruntled. They think their boss is an ass. Well, when we go on site, I do promote I'm not afraid of conflict. I think it's necessary at times. And so I'll have candid discussions with the supervisor or HR or safety and say, here's the barrier to return to work. How can we work through this? We've had a tremendous amount of success through just getting it out on the table and working through that. Then what we would do, and it's kind of crazy to think about, back when I started, we would literally have a provider go over to a calendar and they would say the average strain, sprain, contusion, whatever is back to normal in 4 weeks, let's just say. And they'd say, today you got injured, so you're off work, or you can only lift 5 pounds. The second week, you look at the calendar, we're not there yet. Third week, finally the fourth week, on Friday, you go to a follow-up and they say, it's been 4 weeks, you return full duty as a welder, lifting 80-pound parts with a back strain. Well, Friday, you were lifting 5 pounds, and Monday, you're going to lift 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds. That's not a good setup. It's just not a good system to promote a successful return to work. Plus, even though we don't want to talk about it sometimes, that injured worker may have a legitimate fear of re-injury or a concern, can I do that lift? I haven't lifted anything in a month, and now I have to go back. Then when they go back to the employer and say, hey, I'm just concerned, I don't know if I can do this, red flags pop. And the employer says, wait a minute, this guy's saying he can't even do his job anymore because he got injured. We've got a player. We better call the attorneys. We better increase our costs significantly by getting legal involved. So it just wasn't a good model. Very little communication. Some employers would say we don't have light duty, so they're off work. Some employers would say we have light duty, and we'll talk about why light duty differs from transitional work and why historically it really wasn't that successful. So transitional work is progressive, light duty is not, like we just talked about. Transitional work is closely monitored, including going on site to the job, talking to the supervisor, to safety, to HR, to the injured worker. Light duty wasn't really monitored. Transitional work, you're involving at a minimum the therapist, the provider, the employer, the injured worker, the MCO, the TPA, the BWC, and if an attorney is involved, hopefully not. With the light duty, it was basically a doc and an employee. I can't tell you how many employers would say, I'd like to call the doctor and ask, but I know I can't. I'm like, absolutely you can. Well, the provider won't talk to me. Well, then it's time you find a different clinic. Well, the provider will talk to you because that's part of the process. And you're paying the bill and it's your injury. You're obligated to get them better through the BWC, basically. So you're obligated or allowed to have some information about it as well. And you're allowed to give input. I had a employer call one time and say, it seems like all you do is listen to the injured worker. And I said, why, what's going on? Well, here's our side of it. And they haven't been showing up to work and they did this, they did that. I said, well, when did you tell the provider that? Well, I can't tell him that. I said, well, the only thing we have to go off of is what the injured worker is telling us. If you're not talking to us, so call. Let's come to your company. I'll bring the provider. Let's chat. And the provider was very pleased to know the other side of the story because we do need to have the whole story. So with transitional work, it's a process. We might put you back to work at 5 pounds and easily tell that you could do 10 or 20, or maybe you can't do 5, but we're there to talk about it versus just a static decision that might not be working that everyone's disgruntled about. Transitional work includes the job. So hopefully the job tasks you're doing are job tasks on your main job, your regular job, just not all of them, versus light duty. We're just talking about the injury and some task you might or might not be able to do at work. We assess culture. A lot of times that's a barrier to return to work, a morale issue. Light duty, we don't really do that. And then it's on-site and clinic-based both versus just in the clinic. So when an injured worker comes into the provider and says, I lift 50,000 pounds a second, it's nice when the provider says, Jared was just out there this morning and reviewed all the job tasks, and this is what we see. I'm not trying to argue with you, but can you make me understand better where you got those numbers? I'm telling you, it's a significant portion of the time the injured worker says, oh, that's just it. Oh, I didn't realize you guys talk. And this is a team approach here. So transition work, the employee is paid typically, or you should anyway. That's another story, but you pay wage continuation so you avoid a lost time claim. And light duty and modified duty, commonly it becomes a lost time claim historically. Transitional work's a team. Light duty doesn't really have a team. Transitional work is policy driven. Light duty, modified duty typically is not. The employee is part of the process. That's a big thing with transitional work. As Deb said, you have to sign the agreement stating that I agreed to this, versus walking into the employer back, or the physician back in the day, and them saying, you're going back to work tomorrow, 5-pound lifting. Well, they're ticked. They didn't have any input. What happens if they agree? Or sometimes the employee would say, I can do 10 pounds easily. Or we have situations where, this is very interesting, we checked the box on the Medco that said no lifting over 10 pounds. They were doing it easily, and the part for full-time, full duty was 11 pounds. That's not, no joke. That's an actual scenario we had. And because we were on site, we were able to weigh that part and know what it was. We called the provider and said, can we just release them full duty? Because the part's only 11. And they're like, I don't care if 10 versus 11. Bring the injured worker back in. Brought him in. He said, yeah, cool. And next thing you know, they're full duty. We'd have never known that if we weren't doing an on-site team approach through transitional work. The employer is part of the process. Like I said, they need to speak up, and it works, and light duty just typically doesn't. And now one more time, did I mention culture? Because that's so many times, as they say, the number one pre-contributing factor to injury in Ohio, many times is morale. So there we are dealing with those scumbag millennials. No, just kidding. And I like OSHA. So functional restrictions, we want to make sure we have functional restrictions. So a lot of times the provider says, well, I gave functional restrictions. They can't lift over 10 pounds. Or even better, cannot work on line 5. That's a doozy. Obviously, you have an injured worker chatting with a physician, making some type of an arrangement, because unless the physician can tell me, what about line 5 do you not like? There's been some discussions going on that as the employer, I want to be involved in, because I'm not liking that. So when you say no lifting over 10 pounds, the doctor thinks, yeah, that sounds good. And the employer or the third shift supervisor that's trying to discern what this means says, which arm, or is that both? Or how often can they do it? Or from what level to what level? And does that mean it's a greased bowling ball or something with a handle? And can they lift it every second? Or do they have to be able to drive their own pace, machine pace versus employee pace? Can we make modifications to make it a little bit better? Everybody's just trying to scramble and say, what exactly does that mean? Now, a lot of times we can understand that. Sometimes we can't. If we're on site with transitional work, you literally just ask the therapist, hey, what does this mean? And we have an opportunity to say, I'm the eyes and ears of the physician. I'm out here. And many times we're a liaison. So I have an injured worker saying that's not a job match. I have the employer saying that is a job match. And before you start calling each other dirt bags and get attorneys, the therapist can say, I'm trained in the injury rehab, and I'm trained in assessing the job, and I know what the physician means. And there's many times I will say this is a job match. If you don't want to do that, you can voluntarily relinquish your position called job abandonment, but this is a job that matches your restrictions. Sometimes I tell the employer, hey, you're pushing it here. I don't want them going back to the doctor stating this is what they do. So this isn't a job match on your side. Typically, though, it works out. And the opportunity to be there and to explain that on site as an outside party versus the supervisor saying it's a match, get to work, is tremendously successful. So when we talk about the job site analysis component of the grant, some people ask, why do you have to do that? Well, 95% of return to work decisions were, hopefully this is changing now with transition work, but made without the benefit of measurement, just a subjective guess as best we can. And most job descriptions historically were completed to establish wage scales, not to identify the physical demands of the job. So when the doctor says, give me the job description and I'll see what they can do, and it says, show up to work on time, smile and be nice, and you have to have this degree, it doesn't help us any. So they have to be valid, accurate, comprehensive, and quantitative. We also use those for pre-placement testing sometimes. So if we know what the job is, we can assess them as a post-offer pre-placement essential function test. We can match them to a functional capacity evaluation. So I know what the injured worker can do because of the results of this FCE. Now I need to match that with what they need to do at work and see if it's a job match. We can use that to identify job rotation because we know what tasks are in each job. Employee injuries in the future, if they get injured, we're able to assess what they were back at the baseline. It is a crucial component. You can't have transitional work without having good job descriptions, which is nice that they now pay 100% of the cost rather than a 3-to-1 match. And then you return to worker to work to increase morale and participation. And as we said, the workers involved. This is a lengthy list of most of the things we capture when we do a job site analysis. So literally we want to know how much they sit, lift, push, pull, squat, carry, bend, kneel. Is that 150 degrees or 20 degrees? Is it machine driven pace or employee driven pace, etc.? So capturing a good amount of the information that we need to know. Look on the chat here. Doug says, doesn't your statement of money being first contradict your earlier statement of taking a people first approach to transitional work? I'm just going to ignore that because I like Doug, but I do understand what you're saying there. And so I get it, but it's our biggest asset and biggest expense. And on-site therapy, what would you say if a union contract does not allow for on-site therapy? If they don't allow for on-site therapy, I honestly, I've had success saying, let's meet with the union steward, let's sit down and discuss why that is. And I don't know any union, we haven't been able to work around that. And if not, then at least we had an opportunity to sit down and explain what it was. And usually there's some benefit out of that meeting, even if we don't necessarily succeed in getting on-site therapy. So that's a good question. Unions do sometimes pose issues that non-union employers might not pose. And then Tom said our MCO has been a huge help with many of these common issues. And that's a great comment. We definitely want to point out that the roles and responsibilities and the training part of the grant defines everybody, including MCO, injured worker, provider, therapist, et cetera. And we include them. And typically I'll ask that the MCO come to one meeting when it's all wrapped up to sit down and say, do you understand your roles as the MCO? We all on the same page. From this point forward, we're going to utilize a transitional work program for return to work. Make sure everyone's on the same page. And so going on with JSA, significant worksite measurements, critical job demands. So we're not allowed to focus on non-essential functions. It's the essential job functions is what they can only be tested on for pre-employment testing. And it's the main thing we really want to look at. So if I'm a therapist and I transfer patients, that's essential. If we're keeping me off of work because every other week I'm responsible to empty the trash, that's not an essential function, and we can find someone else to do that task. And we want to focus on what they primarily need to do. We have a quick reference spreadsheet here, employee sign-off sheet and supervisor sign-off sheet saying that, yeah, that's indicative of the job. And then we also do a risk identification form, which isn't part of the grant, but we go ahead and do that, which is just ergonomic issues that we've identified that we think could make a significant difference. I don't like going in to do a job site analysis and I say that you lift 80 pounds from the floor when there's a shelf there that we could put that product on, et cetera. So usually I'll say, hey, can we make an ergonomic change and then do the job site analysis? Because I don't want to do a JSA saying that you lift 80 pounds from the floor, but it's easily correctable. So we try to bring that into play right then. The checklist we have here, again, physicians. When I first started doing these, the JSA for me was about 12 pages long. I was all proud. I had every measurement you could imagine. It was awesome. Handed it to the Occupational provider, and he said, so can they go to work or not? I said, here, you're not going to believe all this information. He's like, yeah, cool. Anyway, what's up? I was like, okay, well, I typed a lot of stuff. He's like, right, that's the problem. You typed a lot of stuff. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, but I was very proud to no avail. So we have kind of evolved. Matt Call and I were on a task force with the Bureau talking about what the job set analysis should include and look at the transitional work forms that we have. This is nice. A doctor just takes a look at this real quickly. If they want more information, we have more, but this is something they can glance at and get an idea of what they do at work. We can put weights in here, not just a check in each box. Again, Deb did a good job with this. So there's just some of the things that are included in indirect costs that you might not initially think about. And then essential function tests, kind of different from the transitional work side, but if you do transitional work and you have a good job set analysis, then you are set up to go ahead and go through with essential function testing. And what that is I have a position in my company that is very physically demanding, or I seem to have a lot of injuries in, or both. I can set up a pre-placement post-offer essential function test where I have them go through the paces at their physical and make sure they can safely do that job. We're doing these more and more for employers because it's a good way to identify if they can safely do the job or not. Then if you have someone get injured in that department and you say, hey, they had hip surgery or they had a work-related injury, can they come back? You have a test set up and can say it's legal and fair. It's the same test when you hire in. We're going to have you go through that same test to get you back to work. Again, it only tests the essential functions of the job, not secondary or non-essential. During that essential function test, we provide education on how to lift appropriately, biomechanics, pacing, monitoring your pulse, things like that. So it's not just, can I lift this? It establishes a baseline so we know when they got hired in what they're able to do. And we put the right person in the right job. Sometimes people take anthropometric data. So if someone's 6'6" and it's a job that's barely off the floor, we want to move them to a position that better suits their measurements or their anthropometric data. It's the same by saying this person can lift 20 pounds, but the job requires 60 pounds. Well, obviously we know we're going to have a workers' comp claim or turnover very quickly. So there's no sense in even doing that. So I've rattled a lot. I appreciate the opportunity. We have a little bit of time, I think, here left for some questions.
Jared, thank you again. Great breakdown there, and some good chat questions as well as we were going along. Unless someone else has others, I had to just back to the your example with your friend. Do you think? I mean, this is not exactly what the focal point of that example was, but in terms of as a employer and when you have an injured worker, is there maybe some like legal reasons why you'd be careful about how you communicate with them? And it might look to the employee like they just don't care, but as an employer, could you run into foul trouble if you're reaching out and asking like, hey, how are you feeling? Are you feeling better now? Or things like that? Like, is that part of maybe why he wasn't contacted, or is there any issues with that? And that's how transitional work could help you communicate with them throughout that process, because it's now giving them a pathway to getting back to work and also making it seem like you're communicating with them on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would say yes to both. The first question was, do some people not communicate because of legal reasons? I would say probably yes, because they don't know any better. You definitely can ask the injured worker how they're doing it if it's a workers' comp injury. Now, you can use transitional work for non-work related injuries as well if you choose and use the same setup, but then you have to be careful about what you're asking because privacy issues, et cetera, when it's not workers' comp. And then the second thing is, yes, transitional work definitely can help enhance the communication to let them know that they're cared for. We did where I had worked previously, and we do it here to a great extent, but we had a study, if you will, where we were hearing from the injured workers in therapy that HR didn't care about them, and it was, it's just ridiculous. So we had the employer call the injured worker and just say, hey, hopefully everything is going good. We want to make sure that you're healing and that therapy is going smooth. We're excited to get you back at some point when you're ready. And as soon as they'd say, well, my next appointment is to, HR was trained to say, no, I'm not asking when is your next appointment. When do you think you're coming back? I'm just calling to say that I hope that you can come back safely. We miss you and we hope that you're progressing well. And I'm not kidding you. Then on the therapy side, we would track that same patient and people would come in and say, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, what's up? And it's kind of funny because a lot of times we knew what was coming. HR called, something's up. I'm like, oh, what's up? They called and just said they miss me and they're excited for us to come back because, we're a valued part of the team. And then when I said my next appointment's Tuesday, they said, that's not what I'm asking about. Because really the HR has that information if they want it anyway. You don't need to ask the injured worker that. You can ask the therapist, in transitional work especially, but even outside of that, you can call the clinic. That's your right. You can ask when the appointments are. So it was unbelievable to see the difference, which is why I'm trying to migrate from the big burly welder mindset that I was raised on to, you know what, this really does make a difference when you just say, we care about you. I don't want to hear about your therapy visit, when you're going to be back. I just want to let you know that I care. More times than not, that injured worker starts divulging so much information that HR really wants to know, but you don't necessarily want to ask. And they start saying, well, just to let you know, I have you. Therapy's going good. I think I'm going to be back next Tuesday. Then there you go.
Awesome. Jared, as always, you're a wealth of information and a great resource for us. And thank you again, both to you and Deb. We will, unless there's any other questions, we'll share this information with our Safety Council, both of the PowerPoint presentations and some follow-up content information for both of our speakers today. With that, I think we'll wrap up. And again, reminder, the Lacey Award is happening. We're accepting until September 10th, I believe. So if you can get into that, please recommend you fill that out. And we'll see you all virtually again next month. Next month. And then I think it's October is the one where it's going to be a non-us and a super mega BWC led virtual presentation in October. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you all later. Thank you.
Thank you.